The rain had been falling over New York City since dawn, a thin misty drizzle that softened the neon glow of the streets and washed the air with the metallic scent of wet pavement. Inside La Meridiana, an upscale Italian restaurant at the edge of Manhattan's old Mafia district, Naomi Bennett moved like a quiet shadow between tables, her small hands trembling slightly as she set down polished silverware. She had been working here for 3 years, long enough to memorize every creak of the wooden floor and every mood swing of the regular customers, but she still felt the nervous flutter in her chest each time the door opened. It wasn't the food or the customers that made her anxious, it was life itself. The pressure to survive. To be useful. To stay unnoticed. To avoid mistakes. Her soft brown eyes carried a heaviness that came from years of doing what she must, not what she wanted. Her childhood had been stitched with misunderstandings, broken promises, and a father who left too early for heaven and a mother who stayed too long in sadness. Naomi had learned silence as a shield, kindness as a language, and patience as survival. She moved softly, spoke lightly, and never demanded space. But under her quiet exterior lived a heart that longed desperately to be seen even if she pretended otherwise. Tonight, the restaurant buzzed with a strange tension. The owners moved with stiff shoulders. The cooks whispered in the kitchen. Even the waiters who normally pushed Naomi around gave her a little space. Something was happening, something big. And she knew it the moment the black SUV rolled to a stop outside and the double doors swung open. He entered first. A tall man in an expensive charcoal suit, the fabric hugging the strength of his shoulders like it had been stitched for his soul alone. His aura hit the room before his footsteps did, an icy presence, sharp, controlled, powerful. His name was Dante Marcelli, the most feared mafia boss in New York City's underground, a man whose network reached politicians, billionaires, and shadows that ordinary people never saw. People didn't breathe around him, they waited. Behind him walked 2 guards, broad and silent. And between them, an elderly woman with silver hair pinned elegantly, her eyes soft and gentle, her steps careful but graceful. She clutched a small purse and looked around with innocent curiosity, unaware of the invisible fear that followed her son everywhere. Naomi felt the shift instantly. The room tilted, not literally, but emotionally, the way a heart dips before something important happens. She knew who Dante was, of course. Everyone did. But this was the first time she had ever seen his mother. And for reasons she couldn't explain, her attention locked onto the woman immediately, not the son, not the guards, not the intimidating aura, just the woman. There was a frailty to her. A softness. A warmth Naomi had rarely felt from anyone in years. Dante's mother settled into her seat, but something about the way she glanced at Naomi felt different. She smiled, a gentle, slow smile, and Naomi felt something tighten in her throat. She bowed her head politely, but then she noticed something the staff hadn't mentioned, something that shifted everything. When the waiter beside Naomi asked the woman a question, she didn't respond. Not out of arrogance, but because she couldn't hear. Her eyes flicked between lips but couldn't understand. She was deaf. Naomi's chest tightened, not out of pity, but recognition. Understanding. Connection. This wasn't the first deaf person she'd met. She had spent nights teaching herself sign language secretly, quietly, after her little cousin lost hearing in an accident. Her family couldn't afford therapy, so Naomi became her teacher, her companion, her voice. Most of the staff didn't even know Naomi could sign, they barely knew anything about her. But now, watching the woman struggle to understand the waiter speaking too fast, panic flickering faintly in her eyes, Naomi felt that old ache in her heart return. The desire to help. The instinct to step forward. But helping Dante Marcelli's mother wasn't helping. It was risking. Risking attention. Risking involvement. Risking stepping into the orbit of a man whose power could crush people like paper. She should have stayed back. She should have minded her job. She should have remembered the rules: don't draw attention. But kindness was louder than fear inside her, always had been. So before she realized she'd moved, Naomi stepped softly toward the table, her heart pounding like footsteps in an empty hallway. Dante's eyes flicked up instantly. Cold. Sharp. Calculating. The kind of stare that could slice a person open without touching them. But Naomi didn't freeze this time. Her attention went straight to the mother. Naomi gently tapped the table to catch her eye, then slowly signed. Hello. How are you? The entire table froze. Everything stopped, the guard's breathing, Dante's grip around his glass, even the nervous chatter from nearby customers. His mother blinked. Then her eyes widened. Then a smile warmer than summer stretched across her face. She signed back, hands trembling with excitement. You know this? You sign. Naomi nodded, hands shaking but steady enough to communicate. A little. I hope it's okay. The woman grabbed Naomi's hand with both of hers, tears already forming in her eyes. It was a reaction too raw, too immediate, too pure, and Naomi felt her throat tighten again. Dante watched the exchange like a man seeing light for the first time after years underground. His mother hadn't smiled this genuinely in months. Naomi didn't know that. Naomi didn't know she had just stepped into the heart of the most dangerous man in New York. Naomi didn't know she had just altered the direction of her life. But she felt something, a strange, quiet shift. Like fate had taken her wrist and whispered. Don't be afraid. This is where your story changes. As Naomi signed slowly with trembling hands, guiding the mother through the menu and making her laugh with a shy comment about the oversized pasta portions, Dante leaned back in his chair, studying her with an intensity that could burn through glass. There was danger in his gaze. But there was something else too. Something Naomi had never seen directed at her in her entire life. Respect. Curiosity. A flicker of something softer beneath layers of stone. Not attraction. Not yet. But the beginning of something neither of them understood. Because kindness, the kind Naomi carried, could soften the hardest shadows. Even a Mafia king's. And tonight, kindness had spoken louder than words. Louder than power. Louder than fear. And Dante Marcelli had heard it. Even if he didn't know how. Naomi stepped back slightly, allowing the mother to explore the menu with ease, her hands occasionally brushing the woman's in gentle encouragement. Each sign she made was deliberate, slow, and careful, but her heart raced with adrenaline she hadn't felt in years. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, as if even the chandeliers overhead were waiting to see what would happen next. Patrons who had previously scoffed at Naomi's shy demeanor now watched her with quiet awe, whispers trailing across the tables. Dante remained still, his fingers tapping lightly against the edge of his glass. The room's tension was palpable, the kind that made hair rise at the back of one's neck. He had seen countless acts of loyalty, obedience, even brutality. He had commanded fear and respect in ways most couldn't imagine. Yet, this a quiet, unassuming girl connecting with his mother in silence made him feel something unfamiliar. Something sharp, probing, and dangerous, like a crack in his armor that he hadn't realized was there. Where did you learn to do that? He asked finally, his voice low, smooth, and edged with curiosity rather than anger. Naomi's gaze flicked toward him. Her pulse skipped, but she answered honestly, signing again slowly so his mother could see. I learned for someone I loved, my cousin. She couldn't hear, and I wanted to speak for her when she couldn't. The woman's smile broadened, eyes glistening with tears, and Dante's stare hardened not with anger, but with intrigue. Naomi didn't flinch under it. She had spent her life hiding from people who could crush her with a word, yet here she was, standing tall in front of a man whose reputation alone could silence a room. The first course arrived, freshly baked bruschetta and steaming bowls of minestrone. Naomi moved like a shadow, careful not to drop anything, careful not to misstep. But every small movement she made carried a silent grace, and his mother noticed. She pointed at a piece of bread, signing for Naomi to pick it up for her. Naomi complied instantly, their hands brushing again, laughter shared in soft, wordless understanding. Dante watched, his thoughts tangled. He was a man who believed the world was measured in influence, territory, and control. He didn't understand gestures like this. He didn't know kindness could carry the weight it did. And yet, Naomi's quiet courage, the subtle defiance of her simplicity in his world of power, was unraveling something in him he hadn't realized existed. Hours seemed to stretch into moments. Naomi's interaction with his mother became more natural, the conversation flowing entirely in the elegant language of hands and eyes. Every laugh, every small smile, was a silent rebellion against the tension that normally clung to the Marcelli name like a shadow. Patrons glanced from table to table, whispering to one another about the girl who could calm the feared Mafia matriarch. The first real test came when Dante's mother gestured toward the window. Rain still poured outside, and her hands trembled slightly, pointing at the puddles forming along the curb. Naomi nodded, understanding instantly, and signed. "Do you want to see the street? It's beautiful in the rain." The mother's face lit up, and Naomi guided her gently to the window, ensuring the older woman's safety. Dante's guards watched, tense, their usual vigilance heightened, but even they couldn't contain the fascination in the room. Naomi's hands moved gracefully, narrating the rhythm of the rain, the reflection of neon lights on wet asphalt, the distant sound of taxi horns blending into a city symphony. "You're remarkable," Dante said finally, his tone low enough for only Naomi to hear. She froze slightly, startled at the compliment, unsure if it was sincere or a trap. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "Most people, they'd just keep their heads down. They wouldn't dare touch the world of the Marcellis unless they wanted trouble." Naomi swallowed, her voice trembling slightly. She signed carefully, words deliberate. "I'm not here for trouble. I just want to help." Something shifted in Dante then, a subtle, dangerous smile curling at the corner of his mouth. For the first time, he realized he didn't fully understand this girl. Her courage wasn't the kind that relied on power or intimidation. It was quiet, deliberate, and yet far more potent than anything he had ever encountered. The night stretched on. Conversation, silent yet profound, flowed between Naomi and his mother. Dante's own world, the shadowed halls of Mafia clubs, the whispered deals in back alleys, the constant tension of wealth and power felt distant, almost meaningless in contrast to this simple display of human connection. Naomi's presence reminded him of something long buried beneath layers of control and fear, empathy, tenderness, and the unspoken strength of kindness. And then, as dessert arrived, a rich tiramisu served with delicate chocolate curls, Naomi's hands brushed lightly against Dante's mother's once more. In that moment, the room seemed to exhale. Even the guards loosened their shoulders slightly. Naomi smiled softly, signing a simple phrase. "You are loved." Tears welled in the mother's eyes, and Dante's hand tightened imperceptibly on the table. He didn't understand how a single phrase, communicated without words, could ripple through the heart like a quiet earthquake. But he felt it. He felt respect. He felt admiration. And he felt a stirring of something dangerous, something that might one day become trust. The shift was subtle but undeniable. The Marcelli table, once the center of fear and power, had become a place where humanity mattered more than authority. Where kindness could challenge dominance. Where a shy, introverted waitress had altered the rhythm of a man whose reputation was built on fear. Naomi stepped back, hands trembling, heart racing, yet a small, proud smile touched her lips. The night had been more than she had imagined. She hadn't just survived an encounter with the most powerful man in the city, she had spoken in a language stronger than any weapon, a language Dante Marcelli couldn't ignore. And tonight, power didn't roar. It listened. The evening darkened, the rain outside finally easing into a gentle mist, casting a silver glow across the wet streets. Naomi returned to her post behind the counter, her heart still pounding from the encounters at the Marcelli table. She moved quietly, almost invisible, yet each step carried the weight of the unspoken events that had just unfolded. The restaurant buzzed faintly with chatter, but Naomi's focus was solely on Dante's mother, whose soft laughter still echoed in her mind. From across the room, Dante observed her closely. He had never been one to be distracted, yet Naomi's presence tugged at him in a way he couldn't ignore. His life was built on control, on domination, on calculating every move, but here was a girl who had, without authority or threat, commanded his full attention. He didn't understand it yet, but he would. He always noticed those who moved differently, and Naomi moved with a silent force he had not anticipated. Dante leaned back, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. The guards remained attentive, but even they felt the subtle tension in the air, a tension that spoke of unspoken possibilities. He could sense that Naomi's kindness wasn't weakness, it was a form of strength he hadn't accounted for, a quiet, dangerous resilience that could not be measured in money or muscle. The mother's hands twitched, fingers brushing unconsciously against Naomi's as if seeking reassurance. Naomi approached again, gently guiding her back into conversation, signing with patience, warmth, and an effortless grace. Each motion carried meaning, and with every gesture, the bond between them deepened. Dante's thoughts drifted unexpectedly. He remembered the first time he had seen his mother truly laugh in years, and it was because of Naomi. A simple waitress, unremarkable to most, had stirred something inside the matriarch, a joy that had been absent for decades. And Dante, for all his power, wealth, and reputation, could not deny the ripple it caused in him. By the time the main courses were cleared, a subtle shift had occurred. Naomi's presence was no longer just noticed, it was felt. Patrons whispered, stolen glances were exchanged, and Dante's guards, though loyal, began to relax their rigid vigilance. Naomi had done something rare, she had humanized a table steeped in fear and authority. As she cleared the final dishes, Dante's voice, calm yet carrying a quiet command, spoke. Naomi. The room seemed to tighten around the syllable, the way a chord resonates before a crescendo. She turned, hands still wet from wiping a counter, and met his gaze. Yes, sir, she asked softly, signing subtly for his mother to understand, he wants to speak with me. Dante stood, the movement deliberate, controlled. His presence loomed, but it was different now, not threatening, not predatory, but assessing, calculating, intrigued. Come with me, he said. His tone was an invitation and a challenge at once. Naomi hesitated, awareness prickling at her skin. This was the moment she had to decide, retreat into invisibility or step fully into a world far beyond her quiet existence. She chose courage. Following him through the dimly lit corridors of the restaurant's private wing, Naomi's mind raced. She knew Dante's reputation. She knew what stepping into his orbit could mean: risk, danger, perhaps even ruin, but her instincts told her this was something different. Something vital. They entered a private lounge, the air thick with the scent of aged leather and expensive whiskey. Dante's mother remained at the table, a gentle smile gracing her features as if sensing Naomi's small act of bravery. Dante motioned for Naomi to remain standing, studying her silently, his eyes dark, unyielding, yet somehow softened by curiosity. You have a way with her, he said finally, voice low, measured. Most people wouldn't dare. Most people wouldn't even notice. Naomi swallowed, steadying herself. I wanted to help, she signed softly, her fingers precise. She glanced at his mother, who nodded in understanding, her eyes shining with gratitude. Dante's expression hardened momentarily, then softened in ways he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Helping. That's dangerous in my world, he said, almost as if testing her. People like you, they get hurt. Naomi met his gaze, steady. Maybe, she signed again, but sometimes the risk is worth it. A flicker of something unspoken passed between them, a tension neither could name, a recognition of strength and courage, and perhaps the first stirrings of respect, maybe even admiration. In the quiet of that room, power and kindness collided, each redefining the other. Hours later, as the night deepened, Dante escorted his mother to the car, her hand firmly in Naomi's. The guards watched silently, and Naomi's own pulse thrummed with anticipation and fear. She had entered this world cautiously, tentatively, yet she had already left an indelible mark. The car doors closed, and the rain-slicked streets reflected the city lights like liquid fire. Naomi watched them disappear into the mist, a sense of both relief and longing coiling in her chest. She had survived the night, yes, but more than that, she had carved a place in the heart of the most powerful man she had ever met. And Dante, for all his control, all his power, all his darkness, would remember. Because the language she spoke wasn't words. It wasn't influence. It wasn't fear. It was kindness. And in a world where everyone demanded allegiance, Naomi had given something far stronger. The next morning, Naomi arrived at La Meridiana before the sun had even touched the skyline. The city was quiet, wrapped in the grey light of early dawn, the streets glistening from last night's rain. She had barely slept, her mind replaying every gesture, every glance, every fleeting smile from the night before. She knew she had stepped into something bigger than herself, a world she had only glimpsed in rumors and whispered stories, a world of power, influence, and danger, where one wrong move could cost more than she was willing to imagine. Yet, despite the fear, Naomi couldn't suppress the small thrill that ran through her. The memory of Dante's mother's eyes, the way they had lit up at her signs, warmed her chest. It had been more than just an encounter. It had been recognition, connection, a reminder that even in a life of shadows, there was light. The morning rush began, patrons streaming in with business meetings and casual breakfasts, the clatter of dishes and chatter of voices forming the familiar rhythm of her world. Naomi moved among the tables with practiced ease, but her mind was elsewhere, lingering on the events of the previous evening. By mid-morning, a discreet envelope was slipped onto her station. Naomi looked around, puzzled, but the restaurant was busy, everyone occupied with their own tasks. She picked it up cautiously, her fingers trembling slightly. Inside was a single note, written in precise, elegant handwriting. "Meet me tonight. 9 p.m. No one else. D." Her pulse raced. Dante. She felt a cold thrill of fear, but alongside it, a flicker of determination. This wasn't a summons to punish or humiliate her, something in the careful brevity of the note suggested intrigue, curiosity, maybe even respect. Naomi tucked the envelope into her apron pocket, trying to steady her thoughts. The day passed in a blur, each hour stretching her patience as she served patrons mechanically while her mind wandered to the impending meeting. She tried to tell herself it was just a meeting, nothing more, nothing dangerous, yet she knew better. Nothing involving Dante Marcelli was ever nothing. Night fell with a velvet hush, the city lights casting a golden glow on rain-slicked streets. Naomi arrived at the small, discreet club Dante had specified, a place she had heard about but never dared enter. It was one of the hubs of his power, frequented by influential figures, enforcers, and allies. The bouncer, a mountain of a man with eyes sharp as knives, barely glanced at her before nodding and letting her pass. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of expensive cigars and polished wood. Low music pulsed through the room, a slow rhythm that mirrored the tension in Naomi's chest. She spotted Dante immediately, standing in the shadows near a private table, his presence magnetic and commanding even in dim light. He gestured for her to approach. Naomi's steps were measured, cautious, yet each carried confidence she didn't realize she possessed. As she drew closer, Dante's gaze held her in place, studying her every movement. "You came," he said simply, voice low, measured. "Yes," Naomi replied softly, a hint of defiance in her tone. "I wasn't going to run." Dante's eyes flickered with something unreadable. Approval? Intrigue? Perhaps a mixture of both. He gestured for her to sit, though she remained standing a moment longer, instinctively deferring. Finally, she lowered herself into the seat, hands resting lightly on the table. The conversation began quietly, Dante testing her with subtle questions, gauging her intelligence, her courage, her loyalty. Naomi responded carefully, never flinching, never over-explaining, allowing her composure to speak volumes. With each exchange, Dante's intrigue deepened. He was used to people being intimidated by him, cowering or flattering excessively, but Naomi was neither. She was direct, honest, and quietly fearless. Hours passed with dialogue that danced around danger, trust, and curiosity. The club's patrons gave them space, sensing the unusual tension between the young waitress and the most feared man in New York. By the time Naomi rose to leave, the unspoken understanding between them had grown, a delicate web of trust, challenge, and subtle respect. As she stepped back into the cool night air, Dante's voice followed her, "Tomorrow. The restaurant. After hours. Come alone." Naomi nodded, a shiver of anticipation and fear running through her. She knew she was stepping further into a world she didn't fully understand, a world of shadows, power, and danger, but also a world where her small courage could have extraordinary impact. And as the city slept beneath the watchful glow of neon lights, Naomi couldn't help but feel that her life, once quiet and invisible, was about to change forever. The following evening, the restaurant was nearly empty. The last lingering patrons had left, and the staff busied themselves with cleaning and closing duties, their chatter muted by the anticipation Naomi could almost feel vibrating in the air. She had slipped into her uniform with precision, hair tied neatly, movements careful and practiced, yet her pulse betrayed her nerves. Tonight, she was not serving tables, tonight, she would step fully into the world of Dante Marcelli. She arrived at the reserved section, the private dining area dimly lit by amber-hued lamps, their light casting elongated shadows that danced along the walls. Dante was already there, seated at the head of the polished mahogany table, his posture relaxed yet undeniably commanding. His gaze, dark and penetrating, met hers instantly. "You came," he said, voice low, carrying both a statement and a question. Naomi nodded, keeping her composure, but her hands fidgeted slightly at her sides. "I promised," she signed quietly, as his mother had taught her, though tonight it was just between them. Dante's lips twitched into a fleeting smile. "Good. You keep your word." The initial tension hung in the air like mist, thick and almost tangible. Naomi sat across from him, the table a barrier and yet a bridge between their worlds. She observed him carefully, the meticulous arrangement of his cufflinks, the subtle scar that traced his jaw, the aura of control he wielded effortlessly. Dante Marcelli was danger incarnate, yet tonight, he seemed almost human, softened by curiosity and perhaps the faintest spark of respect. "I want to know why you helped her," Dante said finally, referring to his mother, voice smooth yet probing. "Most people would have avoided her. Most would have served her like any other client and stayed out of it." Naomi's eyes met his, unwavering. She signed silently, a simple declaration of her intentions, because she deserved it. She deserved kindness. Dante studied her, the corners of his mouth tightening. There was something in her defiance, in her simplicity, that unsettled him, not because it threatened him, but because it reminded him of something he had buried long ago. Vulnerability. Trust. The rarest currency in his world. Their conversation deepened, moving from careful politeness to probing honesty. Dante tested her wit, her patience, her perception of power and loyalty. Naomi responded without fear, revealing glimpses of her strength and wisdom. She spoke of small acts of courage in her life, of the patience she had learned from hardship, and of the empathy that guided her decisions. Dante's expression shifted imperceptibly as he listened. The initial tension softened into something more intricate and unspoken respect growing with each exchange. He leaned back, swirling the glass in his hand, watching the candlelight dance across her features. "Most people don't have your courage," he said finally. "Not in this city, not in my world. They fear me or they pretend to understand me. You just exist without pretense." Naomi's pulse quickened, but she remained calm outwardly, letting her silence and composure convey her steadiness. She signed again, her movements deliberate. "I've had to survive. I've had to speak when others couldn't. I've learned that courage is not loud. It is quiet." Dante's eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with fascination. He had spent decades commanding fear, demanding loyalty, and manipulating influence. And yet here was a girl who had neither status nor power, and yet she affected him profoundly, touching something in him that had long been dormant. Hours passed like minutes. The conversation flowed effortlessly, shifting from careful discussion to rare moments of levity. Naomi's humor, understated and genuine, drew the faintest smirk from Dante, a rare sight indeed. For the first time, the room felt less like a battlefield of wills and more like a meeting of minds, each testing and measuring the other's strength, courage, and heart. Finally, Dante leaned forward, his hands resting lightly on the table. "I need someone like you," he said quietly, the weight of the words settling between them. "Not for my business, not for appearances, but for balance. Someone who understands what kindness means in a world built on fear." Naomi blinked, a mixture of surprise and curiosity flooding her senses. "Balance?" she asked softly, signing slowly. "I don't understand." "Why me?" "Because you see what others don't," he replied, his voice steady, calm, but layered with intensity. "You see humanity where everyone else sees strategy. You act without calculation, without agenda. And that is dangerous in the best possible way." Her hands trembled slightly as she processed the gravity of his words. Dangerous, yes, but not in the way she had feared. Dangerous because her quiet courage, her small acts of kindness, had penetrated walls that many had tried and failed to breach. Dante rose then, his movements commanding yet deliberate. He approached her slowly, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "I want you by my side," he continued, voice low, almost a whisper, "because the world we live in, it needs people like you. People who remind us that strength is not only measured by power, but by compassion." Naomi felt a shiver run down her spine. She had entered his world cautiously, armed only with kindness and resolve, and now she was being offered a place within it not as a servant, not as a subordinate, but as a trusted presence. Her heart raced, torn between fear and exhilaration. Accepting him, stepping fully into the Marcelli orbit, meant danger, intrigue, and the potential for betrayal, but it also meant purpose, recognition, and a chance to leave an indelible mark. She nodded slowly, signing once more, "I'll stay. I'll help." Dante's lips curved into a rare, almost imperceptible smile. The tension in the room eased slightly, replaced by a quiet understanding, a fragile alliance forged through courage, kindness, and unspoken respect. As the night drew on, Naomi left the private lounge with a sense of accomplishment, a new weight in her chest. She had survived the evening, yes, but she had also carved her place in a world where fear ruled, and kindness was rare. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of New York City, the Marcelli name would remember her, not just as a waitress, but as a girl whose courage had touched the hearts of the most formidable people in the city. The game had changed. The stakes were higher. And Naomi Bennett was ready. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and quiet anticipation. Naomi returned to her routine at La Meridiana, but nothing felt the same. Every table she approached, every glass she polished, every polite smile she offered carried the weight of her new reality. She was no longer just a waitress, she was a girl who had stepped into the orbit of New York's most feared mafia boss. And with that came unspoken rules, invisible boundaries, and a constant sense of being watched by patrons, staff, and most importantly, Dante himself. He didn't appear every day, but when he did, the energy in the room shifted immediately. Guards lingered discreetly, their eyes scanning the restaurant, but their focus often found Naomi. Dante would sit at his usual corner table, silent, observing. Sometimes, their eyes met across the room, and in that brief exchange, Naomi felt a mix of apprehension and something more dangerous, a connection that neither power nor fear could explain. One evening, after the dinner rush, Naomi found a small note tucked under a wine bottle at her station. The handwriting was unmistakable, precise, and deliberate. Meet me at the Marcelli Club. Midnight. Alone. D. Her heart thudded. Midnight. Alone. The instructions were clear, the risks obvious. Yet she felt no hesitation. Fear had never been enough to deter her, and she had learned long ago that courage often required stepping into the unknown. When she arrived at the club, the air was thick with the scent of leather, cigar smoke, and the faint tang of expensive liquor. The lights were dim, casting shadows that stretched and curled along the walls, making the space feel both intimate and dangerous. Dante stood in the center of the room, waiting. His presence was magnetic, a silent declaration of authority and danger. "You came," he said, his voice low, measured, almost approving. Naomi nodded, keeping her composure despite the rapid beating of her heart. "I promised," she replied softly. Dante's eyes, dark and intense, studied her for a long moment. "Good. You've made the right choice. Not many would." They walked through the private corridors of the club, away from the staff and the faint hum of patrons. Naomi's senses were heightened, every shadow, every creak, every whisper of movement alerting her to potential threats. Yet Dante moved with her calmly, as if sensing her apprehension and subtly reassuring her. Finally, they reached a private lounge, the kind where decisions were made and alliances forged. Dante gestured for her to sit, though Naomi remained standing briefly, a habit of respect ingrained from years of careful navigation in a world that didn't forgive mistakes. "I've been watching you," he began, voice smooth but heavy with unspoken weight. "Not for what you can do, but for what you represent. Courage. Empathy. Kindness. Strength." Naomi swallowed, unsure how to respond. Words felt inadequate. She signed quietly, though only he would understand, "I do what I can. I survive. I care." Dante's eyes flickered with interest. "You're different," he said. "Not like the others who enter my world. They crave power, respect, or fear. You exist on your own terms." Their conversation delved deeper, exploring the nuances of trust, loyalty, and the rare intersections of humanity within a world dominated by crime and influence. Dante probed her thoughts, gauging her understanding of power, morality, and risk. Naomi responded with honesty and precision, revealing strength not through aggression, but through unwavering integrity and quiet confidence. Hours passed, the tension between them building subtly, charged with the unspoken energy of mutual recognition. Dante leaned forward, resting his hands on the polished table. "I need someone like you," he said, almost a whisper. "Someone who reminds me that power isn't everything. Someone who can balance this world with humanity." Naomi felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. The offer was more than a job, more than a position. It was a chance to step fully into his world, to influence it in ways she had never imagined, to challenge the norms without fear. She nodded slowly, signing with deliberate calm, "I'll stay. I'll help." Dante's lips curved into a faint smile, the first genuine one Naomi had seen. The tension softened, replaced by a fragile understanding. They were no longer merely boss and employee, or Mafia king and waitress. They were allies of sorts, bound by respect, courage, and the quiet power of connection. As Naomi left the club that night, the city seemed to hum around her, alive with possibility and danger. She knew that stepping further into Dante's world meant navigating shadows, facing threats, and confronting fears she hadn't yet imagined. But she also knew that she was ready. She had already survived the most difficult test of all, winning the trust of a man who had never trusted anyone fully. And somewhere deep inside, she realized that this was only the beginning. The beginning of a story where kindness could change the course of power, where courage could challenge fear, and where a quiet girl could alter the life of one of New York's most formidable men forever. The following week brought new challenges. Naomi had fully stepped into Dante's world, moving carefully between the restaurant, the occasional private meetings, and clandestine visits to his mother. Though her interactions were calm, subtle, and deliberate, the shadow of the Mafia loomed constantly. Rivals watched. Deals were made in whispers. Power shifted like water, and Naomi understood, more acutely than ever, that a single misstep could ignite chaos. One evening, as the rain-slicked streets reflected the neon glow of the city, Dante summoned Naomi to a private meeting in the heart of one of his New York clubs. The air inside was thick with cigar smoke and tension. Guards lingered at the edges, watching silently. This time, however, Dante's demeanor carried something different, a subtle weight, a mixture of pride, concern, and vulnerability that he rarely allowed anyone to see. "You've proven yourself," he began, his dark eyes studying her every movement. "Not just to me, but to my mother, to the people around us. You understand that this world is dangerous, but you navigate it with grace. Courage. Humanity." Naomi's pulse quickened. She had feared this moment, not knowing whether it would bring praise or peril. She signed slowly, deliberately, her hands conveying what words couldn't fully capture, "I only do what I believe is right. I didn't ask for recognition." Dante's lips curved in a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "That's why you matter. Most people crave power. You wield something far stronger. Respect. Kindness. Loyalty earned, not forced." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the club, a rival faction attempting to intimidate Dante's operation. Tension erupted instantly. Guards moved swiftly, but Dante's focus shifted subtly to Naomi. He took her hand, firm and protective. "Stay close," he commanded. The room became a blur of movement, shadows, whispers, and flashes of danger, but Naomi felt a strange calm. Together, they moved with precision. Naomi's quick thinking and composure helped navigate the chaos, assisting Dante's mother, who had been present, to safety in a quiet private room. In those moments, Naomi realized that her courage, her quiet power, had tangible impact. She wasn't just surviving this world, she was shaping it. After the danger subsided, Dante and Naomi found themselves alone, the adrenaline fading but the connection between them deepening. His gaze softened, revealing layers of emotion rarely exposed. "You've changed things tonight," he said quietly. "Not through force, not through fear, through who you are." Naomi's heart thudded. She signed again, softly, "I didn't do it to change the world. I did it to protect the people I care about." Dante leaned closer, his voice a low whisper. "And in doing so, you've protected me too." The moment hung between them, a fragile bridge between fear, power, and something more profound. Neither spoke further, words were unnecessary. Naomi had won his trust, his respect, and perhaps something even more elusive, a hint of vulnerability from a man who had long wielded control as armor. In the days that followed, Naomi's place in Dante's world became clearer. She worked closely with his mother, offering genuine care and attention, strengthening bonds that had been fragile for decades. She assisted Dante strategically, her insight and quiet courage earning subtle nods of approval. And all the while, their unspoken connection grew, a mix of trust, mutual respect, and the kind of understated affection that words often fail to capture. By the time the story reached its quiet resolution, Naomi stood in the restaurant one evening, watching Dante's mother laugh, a sound bright and unguarded, free from the shadows that had long hung over her life. Naomi felt a profound sense of accomplishment, purpose, and inner peace. She had entered a world of danger and emerged not broken, but stronger. Dante approached her, placing a hand lightly on her shoulder. "You've done more than I could have imagined," he said, voice low, sincere. "And yet, you've done it quietly, without asking for recognition. That's rare. That's power." Naomi smiled softly, feeling warmth spread through her chest. "I only did what felt right," she signed, subtly, a gesture Dante understood, even if not perfectly. The simplicity of it spoke volumes, a message of humanity, courage, and quiet strength. The night settled over New York City, the lights reflecting on wet streets like liquid gold. Naomi had found her place in a world defined by shadows and power, her kindness a force that changed not only the people around her but also herself. And somewhere in the subtle quiet of the Marcelli Empire, a message lingered for all to understand: kindness speaks louder than words, courage is quiet, and even the darkest worlds can be touched by light.